the darkest Spider-Man comic. The Amazing Spider-Man, Kraven's Last Hunt, explored. Our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is no stranger to grief and darkness. He has lost several of his loved ones throughout his life, and J.M. DeMatteis' Fearful Symmetry, Kraven's Last Hunt, expands on his loss and puts him through darker situations, both physically and mentally. This comic book was published in 1987, and it quickly became one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. It is brimming with rich imagery, symbolism, and stellar storytelling as both Peter Parker and Kraven, the Hunter, are placed on the opposite sides of the same mirror, while Vermin exists to accentuate the contrast between the two. This will become more and more clear as we discuss the story and talk about how certain parallels have played out and about the characters in the story.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
The Predator, and the ambiguity on who stands on top of the food chain. Kraven's Last Hunt. Plot breakdown. The story opens with a monologue from Kraven as he speaks about himself, his honor, his glory, and his family. He talks about his lineage as a Russian nobleman. The Tsars being overthrown meant that there was no place for someone of his social position in a Russia run by the Lenins and Trotskys. As a result, his family relocated to the United States in 1917. He glorifies dignity, honor, the jungle, and the hunt, while looking at civilization with disgust. He has been alive for quite some time now, and has been able to retain a good physical health with herbs and potions from Africa, all being brewed by knowledge he gained while living in the jungles of Africa. However, he cannot escape his old age and acknowledges that death is closing in on him. But he cannot die yet, as he has always been busted by Spider-Man, and he intends to outdo him. Meanwhile, a cannibalistic killer is on the loose in New York City. At the same time, Joe Face dies not longer after the death of Peter's friend Ned Leeds, whose death seems to have taken a huge toll on Peter. He recognizes a pattern, as everyone he loves seems to end up dead. He assumes that he is going to die as well. At night, Peter gets a nightmare about Kraven, who seems to pose as a spider in the midst of several other spiders. The spiders engulf the Hunter, but the Hunter fights back as he eats away the spiders. In the dream, Peter could not breathe or move, which also foreshadows what is about to come. With his head pounding and heart drumming, he goes out on the streets, swinging from building to building. He keeps sensing that something is searching for him when Kraven the Hunter presents himself in front of Spider-Man. His tormented mental state distorts Kraven's appearance into Joe's and Ned Leeds' face, and he intercepts Kraven's attacks. He is then webbed in a material he cannot seem to break out of and shot with a rifle. Spider-Man's body is buried in a coffin, and a rat walks over that ground. On the other hand, beating Spider-Man is simply not enough for Kraven. He wants to prove his superiority by becoming Spider-Man and doing the job better than Peter Parker ever did. He dons a copy of Spider-Man's black suit. The scenes shift into a rat-infested sewer. We get to see Vermin, a foe of Spider-Man's who he had defeated with help from Captain America. Vermin is afraid of how badly he was hurt by the two of them and seems to be more of a fearful child than an evil man-rat. He was the cannibalistic man who was responsible for several murders across New York City, but he was not always mutated. Underneath his hideous appearance was a man who mutated into this creature after Baron Zemo experimented on him. Meanwhile, Mary Jane grows worried as Peter doesn't come home. Even though he's often out at odd hours fighting his adversaries, something in her head keeps telling her that he is dead. She goes out of the house to search for him when she is chased by two catcallers. They try to catch her, but Spider-Man comes and saves her. He beats the catcallers up brutally, and Mary Jane realizes that it is not Peter. At the same time, Vermin leaves the sewer and searches for Spider-Man. Kraven takes down criminals as Spider-Man, but the people are shocked by the brutality of his combat style, which leaves people severely injured or even dead. This was unlike how Peter Parker did things. He then takes great pride at doing Spider's job better and faster than the Spider, as he hunts down the Spider's prey, proving himself to be his superior. Vermin takes more victims to feed his appetite, while spiders begin to swarm around Peter's grave. Kraven goes to his den and slashes a knife near a rat in a cage, telling us about his next prey. He is aware of how Spider-Man needed aid from Captain America to take down Vermin, so if he could just defeat the Man-Rat by himself, he would prove himself to be a better Spider-Man. He goes down to the sewers, fights Vermin, emerges victorious, and restores his honor. He then takes Vermin's body. On the other end, a hand emerges from Spider-Man's grave, and it calls to Mary Jane. Peter Parker is alive. While he was in a sedentary state in the coffin, he had several nightmares and visions. Similar to his nightmare before, he was stuck in a situation where everything was dark and he could barely move. During one of his visions while he was buried, Peter saw Ned Leeds. He was then attacked, and he watched himself succumb to Kraven's strength. In reality, Kraven had hit him with a tranquilizer and not a bullet because he wanted Peter to be aware of Kraven outdoing him in his own game. Spider-Man leaves his grave and comes across several newspapers where he reads the headlines about Spider-Man going berserk. He also realizes that he had been inactive for 2 whole weeks. He meets up with Mary Jane and wants to stay with her in her warmth and the safety of their house, but he knows that he must go. Spider-Man goes to Kraven's den, who has locked Vermin up in a cage. He talks about how his mother was driven insane as she moved to America. After living a life of nobility, she was traumatized by the life in the United States and in the end took her own life. However, Kraven believes that she did not take her own life, but her life was stolen from her. Spider-Man appears in front of Kraven and he begins to throw punches. Kraven does not defend himself or fight back as he has nothing to prove anymore. He has proved himself to be the better Spider-Man by defeating Vermin single-handedly. He has already won. Kraven takes Spider-Man to Vermin, urging the two to fight. Vermin is lamenting over how Spider-Man hurt him, but Peter tries to explain that it was Kraven in his suit. His negotiations do not work, and he has to fight Vermin. Considering how he needed Captain America's help the last time, and is feeble at the moment anyway, Vermin takes the upper hand in the fight. As Vermin is about to kill Spider-Man, Kraven stops him and lets him go, telling him that he is free. Vermin flees. After Vermin leaves, Kraven helps Spider-Man up and calls him a good man. He urges Spider-Man to go after Vermin as Spider-Man does not want more people to die. Spider-Man is shocked by Kraven's behavior, who takes things to the next level as he says that Kraven the Hunter will never hunt again. Spider-Man leaves. Kraven thinks about how his mother went insane and took her own life. He sticks a rifle in his mouth and shoots himself. Bloodied, he rests his body in a grave as he dies. He also leaves his confession, one where he claims to be the one who tainted Spider-Man's image so that when the cops take his body, they find it. Spider-Man goes down to the sewers to find Vermin, but he claims to feel afraid, which seems to be something both Spider-Man and Kraven have acknowledged within themselves. Their fear does not stem from having to fight or from their foes, but it is a result of mental, traumatic experiences. As Vermin presents himself in front of Spider-Man, who fears the spider as well, the two fight again. Spider-Man and Vermin fight, and this time around, Spider-Man is not as helpless as before. Vermin is afraid of being killed, but Spider-Man acknowledges how Vermin was a man before being mutated. He tries to show empathy, to bring out the human in Vermin, but while doing so, he must also fight the battle in his mind. In the end, Vermin emerges from the sewers to escape Spider-Man, but the sun is out now. The creature of darkness is unable to withstand the light, and with some help from Spider-Man, the cops arrest him. Peter goes home and reunites with his beloved Mary Jane, while Kraven's coffin is buried right beside where Spider-Man's coffin was.
Where'd you come from?
Mother Russia, by way of Mother Africa.
2 moms and still so ill-behaved?
A review of the comic. Fearful Symmetry, Kraven's Last Hunt, is considered to be one of the all-time great stories of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, except the story is far from being friendly and a lot more somber in nature. Writer J.M. DeMatteis referred to The Tiger, which is a poem by William Blake, in the narration of the comic. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? However, the narration replaces tiger with spider, as Kraven talks about Spider-Man. William Blake wrote The Tiger and its parallel poem, The Lamb, to signify how the same God who created a powerful predator, such as the tiger, is the same God who created the weaker prey, the lamb. However, Kraven addresses Spider-Man as the tiger, even though he himself happens to be the hunter, so that would make his adversaries his prey, and yet, Spider-Man often beats him, but he puts Spider-Man above Kraven. which could be why he is so desperate to not to just defeat Spider-Man, but to prove himself to be the superior Spider-Man. Vermin has a similar role in the story. He is the tiger who hunts down his prey, i.e. the common people, but he is also the lamb who is afraid of being hurt by Spider-Man, and Vermin's role is crucial, as it lets us see how differently Peter Parker and Kraven look at things, even when Kraven finds himself in Peter's shoes, literally. The title of the comic begins with Fearful Symmetry, which is a phrase that pops up whenever Kraven narrates his version of Blake's tiger. The story constantly draws parallels between Kraven and Spider-Man as if they are symmetrical, and yet their outlooks are so different. Both Kraven and Spider-Man ponder over death, but as Kraven awaits his own death and takes his own life, Spider-Man fears his death and wants to stay alive as he wishes to be with his lover and wife, Mary Jane. Kraven plays the role of the spider, a creature who is feared, while Peter plays the role of the man, someone who knows and values love. That is often the reason why Kraven separates the words spider and man as he speaks. Kraven considers Vermin to be a beast, the ideal fusion of man and animal, while Peter, with his compassionate nature, sees the man within. In the end, Kraven's grave is also next to Spider-Man's. However, unlike Spider-Man, Kraven actually happens to be dead. Kraven also draws parallels between his relationship with Spider-Man and the end of the Tsarist rule in Russia, his homeland. Him not being able to defeat Spider-Man in the past makes him equate Spider-Man with Lenin's Marxist faction, the Bolsheviks. As part of a noble family, this change caused his family to relocate to the United States, a place he does not love, so Kraven begins to see Spider-Man in a very negative light as his brain enters a more and more turbulent state, causing him to finally follow the footsteps of his mother. Peter Parker also battles with several claustrophobic thoughts following his traumatic experience of being buried, resulting in an inevitable situation of PTSD. Illustrating the feral instincts of Vermin also makes this DeMatteis masterpiece darker, grittier, and edgier. One of the coolest things about this comic is definitely its artwork by Mike Zeck and Bob McLeod. There's a particular panel that illustrates the entirety of Spider-Man's movement when he is attacked by Kraven, which is extremely cool. Then there's this other amazing illustration where we get to see Kraven posing as a spider amongst several spiders. It gives the illusion of the hunter blending in its surroundings to conceal its presence as it waits for its prey. The moment its prey arrives, it pounces on it. It is not uncommon for people to think that comics have simple stories and are not sublime and enriching. And if you want to prove them wrong, Kraven's Last Hunt is an ideal suggestion. The emotional value here is truly impeccable as we see Peter Parker care for and love Mary Jane and show compassion towards others. Kraven's narration also helps add several more layers to his personality, as he is a man who seeks honor over anything else. The story sheds the spotlight on Peter's loving nature, as the first thing he thinks about as he resurfaces is Mary Jane. He does not live for revenge. He does not live for glory, but he lives to love. Despite being a man who has lost so much, he does not stray away from the light. What do you think of this comic? Did you enjoy the video? If yes, then don't forget to like and comment on the video. Till then, goodbye, and have a nice one.
This cannot be happening to Sergei Kravinov!
Oh, Kravinoff.